migration and record high inflation. Before we listen to the Chancellor, we can bring in DW's chief political correspondent, Nina Hase, who's standing by for us at the German Parliament. Nina, can you give us a sense of what we can expect from the Chancellor's speech today?
Well, it is his traditional address ahead of the EU summit that's happening in Brussels on Thursday and on Friday this week. And you've said the topics already. Of course, Ukraine is going to be dominating the discussion, but then there's also talk about migration. We all know that there's a lot of pressure on a lot of EU countries to deal with the influx of migrants and refugees. And for years, the EU has failed to properly reform its migration system. But then there's also the issue of European competitiveness. When you talk about rising inflation, of course, that's a big issue. And of course, the pressure was upped by the US when they announced that $370 billion package to boost their own economy, where some European companies are already wondering whether they will suffer disadvantages. And that also led to the trip to the US by the German economy minister and the French economy minister this week.
Can I ask you, will Olaf Scholz also be commenting on the situation in the earthquake zone in Turkey and Syria?
We can definitely expect that. The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz spoke to Turkish President Erdogan on the phone and again expressed his condolences and assured Erdogan of Germany's continuing support for all those people who are suffering in those regions. So Olaf Scholz will probably spell out details of how Germany is going to continue its support. The first aid organizations left for Turkey straight on Monday after news broke. Germany also has specialized rescue dogs that are there on the ground helping now. There's a gigantic Turkish community here in Germany that's also doing private efforts. So yes, definitely to be expected.
But of course, Ukraine will probably dominate. The German Chancellor, of course, was under a lot of pressure, wasn't he, ahead of his decision to deliver German Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Has this wave of criticism subsided now? I mean, subsided now, especially given that we've just heard that more tanks will be delivered to Ukraine.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Olaf Scholz did his typical Olaf Scholz thing. He kept quiet for weeks and was working to forge a coalition of willing partners that wanted to send tanks to Ukraine, but he wouldn't comment on this deal until he had all the specific details. And so he received a lot of criticism because he left people wondering, will he give the green light to countries sending the Leopard 2 tanks, those modern tanks that Ukraine says it needs so desperately on the ground to counter that offensive that everybody is expecting from Russia, or will he not do that? And then eventually, when he had forged this coalition, he did. And then Germany became the very first country to actually make a very specific, concrete announcement of sending 14 of such modern Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. Others have said that they will also follow suit, but they have yet to spell out the details to say when those tanks will arrive. Germany has, in the meantime, started training as well. So Germany is suddenly in the lead again, and the criticism, yes, it has subsided. And also Boris Pistorius, the new German defense minister, traveled to Ukraine this week and had even more in his suitcase for Ukraine and announced that Germany has also given the green light to up to 178 slightly less modern but still very useful Leopard 1 tanks that Ukraine could get hold of by the beginning of next year. So the first such tanks will go to Ukraine within the next few months, Boris Pistorius said, and that is, of course, also changing the narrative that Germany is suddenly becoming the one country that is delivering, and others now have to also put their money where their mouth was and follow suit.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, changing the narrative, because the delay that some people described as dithering, other people were sort of saying, well, it's a thoughtful process because this is, tank delivery is a big thing for Germany. Is that something that is now changing because of the fact that, as you say, Germany does seem to be stepping up? It really does seem to be delivering. But this image that Scholz had of sort of being terribly careful and dithery, might that take a longer time to change?
I think what happened was very poor political communication of Germany's strategies. On the one hand, Olaf Scholz is not, I tried to describe that earlier, he's not the kind of person who will comment on things that he's not 100% sure of. If he is working on something, he will present the results. He won't comment on the process. And that is, of course, very tricky in a situation where many people are faced with a lot of unknowns, and they need ideas, they need to hear visions, and Olaf Scholz didn't deliver those when he didn't feel that was necessary. Then he had a defense minister in the job who was also not a very good political communicator. She was chosen as defense minister before Russia's aggression against Ukraine went into this full-scale mode, and this is also something where she didn't help transmit Germany's ideas, Germany's military strategy. Now that has been changed. Boris Pistorius is the new man in the job, and many people are saying, even from the opposition, that he's making a very good impression. He knows the vocabulary, he knows the troops, he likes the military, he actually understands the differences between all the weapons models. So in terms of communication, a lot has changed. But also, and you mustn't neglect that, there is a very big factor when it comes to domestic policies. The issue of weapons deliveries to Ukraine has been very contested here in Germany, and especially with Olaf Scholz's own party, the Social Democrats. For years, they believed that they had to build a stronger Europe together with Russia. That was completely thrown overboard, this idea that that was possible on the 24th of February last year when Russia invaded Ukraine. So the SPD, the Social Democrats, the Chancellor's party is having to reinvent itself. And there are still a lot of people here who come from the more traditional, the peace movement within some of the older generations who believe that Russia needs to be a strong partner, who really just want to get back to the negotiating table. And that is, of course, also something that Olaf Scholz has to recognize. And by the way, it's not just the SPD, it's also a very big part of the German population.
Which I was just about to ask you. I mean, there's a very strong, still, anti-war sense in the German population, very against getting involved in anything sort of militaristic. How does the German public feel about the German Chancellor's performance and the direction that he's taking the country in terms of sort of involvement in Ukraine?
In general, the German population support their Chancellor when it comes to his overall approach that, of course, Ukraine must be helped and that Germany must stand by Ukraine's side and that everything must be done so that this infringement, this terrible violation of international law by Russia cannot be tolerated because, of course, it will also have immediate implications here in Germany. Berlin is not very far away from Kyiv, so this is something where you really need to draw the line for Vladimir Putin. This is a message that Olaf Scholz has been sending to the German population, and people do understand, and they are willing. What they're not willing to accept, some people, is that you do need weapons to defend yourself and to keep peace. This is something that many Germans did away with after the end of the Second World War, when they thought, okay, this is the end, this was the last brutal war, no more wars, we will have to negotiate everything at the diplomatic tables. And this is something where now, especially the Green Party has had a tremendous transformation over recent decades, where they also came from the peace movement, but they acknowledge that sometimes you just really need to show that you are strong as well, and that in an international context can best be demonstrated if you've got a functioning military that can then confront the aggressor so that the aggressor stops. But there are a couple of people still here who say, no, we need to stop. And the most important thing is that people get back to the negotiating table. But military experts, security analysts, they all agree that would essentially mean that Ukraine would have to give up some of their territories.
OK. Now, of course, things aren't made easier for the German Chancellor because of the fact that he governs as part of a three-party coalition, doesn't he? And in recent weeks, there's been a lot of criticism about the cooperation within that coalition. Can you give us a sense what the current state of affairs is there?
Well, when you talk about affairs, let me just say it's not a marriage of love, still not. It never was. It is something where, for the very first time, Germans had to forge a coalition of 3 parties instead of 2 from different political fields. So they set out to be this coalition of progress. They wanted to modernize the country and implement some more liberal policies here. But then, of course, 3 months into their jobs, the 24th of February, changed everything last year, and they had to completely go into action mode, into emergency mode. They had to find compromises. And when you talk about support for Ukraine, they're all on the same page, essentially, in that Ukraine needs to be supported. There are a lot of differences when it comes to just how many weapons and how fast those should be delivered to Ukraine. As I just said, the Social Democrats are in crisis mode, essentially, and they're trying to reinvent themselves. They're writing their new foreign policy paper as we speak, and they're trying to discuss that at the end of the year at the big party convention. But the FDP, the smaller party, and the Greens, the other 2 coalition partners, they've always tried to push the SPD to go further and send more weapons more quickly. So that is one big debate that they're having. And then there are a couple of domestic issues as well, where they have differences, because the fight against the climate crisis is something that this government also wants to push forward. And there are completely different ideas when you ask members of the FDP or the Greens how to fight the climate crisis, whether with new technologies only or with also incentives so that people reduce mobility, for example.
All right, Nina. We're going to stop there because Olaf Scholz is about to start addressing the German Parliament.
Sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen,
President,
meine Damen und Herren.
colleagues, ladies and gentlemen.
Schockierende Bilder und Nachrichten erreichen
Shocking
uns seit
images and
Montagmorgen
news
aus dem
have been
Erdbebengebiet
reaching us
in der
since
Türkei und
Monday
Syrien.
morning from the earthquake region in Turkey and Syria. I am very grateful to the President for the words that she has just found, and I believe I speak for us all when I say that we are shocked in the face of the many deceased and injured. We are shocked in the face of so much suffering and destruction. Our hearts and thoughts are with the relatives who have lost their loved ones, the injured, and those who are standing in front of the rubbles of their homes and their existence. The federal government has immediately promised support to the Turkish government. I spoke on the telephone with President Erdogan yesterday. Search and rescue teams and technical experts are already on site or are about to fly there. Humanitarian aid is also provided, and we are in close contact with the United Nations in order to bring humanitarian aid to the earthquake region in Syria as well, where the suffering is immense. Once again, we see how vital border crossing access is, for which we have stood in for many years. And here in Germany as well, we experience a wave of empathy, compassion, and help. I am very grateful to our citizens for that. In that way, they demonstrate how closely our society is linked to the citizens here in Germany who have relatives and friends over there in the affected regions. I am also grateful to our friends and partners in the region. The recent phone call between the Greek president and the Turkish president of state underlines clearly that in the face of a disaster like this, we have to get closer and offer mutual support. Dear colleagues, a disaster of a different kind, a human-made, a man-made disaster, is what Ukraine has been experiencing for almost a year. It will be a year in only a few days for the people in Ukraine. It means that for 12 disastrous months. They have been suffering fear in the face of Russian attacks. They had to mourn their loved ones and fear for their own lives. Thousands of men, women and children already have fallen victim to the Russian war. Millions of Ukrainians are fleeing the country. They are trying to get away from bombs and destruction. 4 million have found refuge in the European Union. It is the largest wave of migration on our continent since the end of the Second World War. Ukraine under attack, its brave citizens are where our hearts are, and we stand in firm solidarity with them. With more than 12 billion euros, Germany alone has offered support to Ukraine and its citizens in the past year, and this important support will continue throughout this year. We help in reconstructing destroyed cities and infrastructure. We stabilize the Ukrainian budget, help the Ukrainian industry, and offer humanitarian aid. And when it comes to the supply with weapons and ammunition, we are at the forefront in continental Europe. From the very first day of the war, one thing has been true. The cohesion within our alliance is our highest good. And this adhesion is something that we foster in preparing decisions behind closed doors and then communicate them, as Joe Biden and myself have done in the face of the recent decision to supply Ukraine with battle tanks. What does damage to our closed ranks is a public competition in offering fighter jets, planes, tanks. Criticizing partners and allies on an open stage does harm to that, and Germany will not play any part in this. Because any kind of dissonance, any kind of speculation on interests serves Putin and his propaganda. As German Chancellor, it is my responsibility to avert damage from the German people. And that leads to 3 clear principles that have been guiding our actions since the war broke out. Firstly, we will not allow that a country simply invades and takes over territories of another country and in doing so shakes the order of peace in Europe. This is why we support Ukraine in defending its sovereignty and its territorial integrity against Russia's war on aggression, as long as it takes. The sanctions against Russia will be continued in the European Union and even enhanced, as a clear signal to President Putin that he will not be successful with his imperialistic schemes. Secondly, we will not make any decision that turns NATO into a party in this war. It is not NATO in war against Russia. Russia has attacked Ukraine, and the majority of the world population has found clear words against this, which is why it is up to Russia to end this war. The earlier, the better. For Ukraine, for Russia, and the entire world. Putin will not achieve his goals, not on the battlefield and not by dictated peace. This is clear after 1 year of this war. Thirdly, everything we do in close cooperation and agreement with our partners and allies. It has been the case for all the important decisions that we have made over the past 12 months. And this is what it will be like in the future, be it the supply with howitzers or missile defense systems to Ukraine, or the delivery of our tanks and now our battle tank. Before we took any steps, we closely aligned our actions with the United States, France, the UK, and others. From the beginning, we also considered logistics. We train Ukrainian soldiers here in Germany in coordination with our allies. And in all that, we keep a clear head, which is needed in order to come to a balanced decision in this situation. The citizens of our country can trust us in that, and this is what I stand for with my word. The Special European Council, starting tomorrow, will be used in order to align our position even closer. Charles Michel and Ursula von der Leyen will report the conversations they had last week with the Ukrainian president. This direct exchange with President Zelensky is very important for all of us, and we will continue it in an intensified manner. The European Council will also be used to underline the promise that the European Council gave the Ukrainians last year. Ukraine is a part of Europe. The future is in the European Union, and this is a promise that we stand by. Dear colleagues, when it comes to alignment amongst partners, this also entails our advancement in fields that sometimes have given rise to tension within the European Union. A geopolitical European Union has to overcome this disagreement, and then even in the multipolar world of the 21st century, it will be a union with the power to design. I am talking about migration and competitiveness here. Those two topics will be raised in the European Council tomorrow. It has been barely a year that the Lukashenko regime in Belarus has instrumentalized political prisoners in order to exert pressure on Europe. Some things have changed in the migration policy in Germany and in Europe. For the war refugees from Ukraine, we have activated the Directive on Temporary Protection, and we did so in a uniform manner. This gave way to justice, but it has made it possible for Ukrainian refugees to work in the European Union, to earn money, and we have created several thousand social security jobs for Ukrainians here in Germany. Many more have found partial employment, learn German, or receive vocational training. More than 1 million Ukrainians have arrived in Germany. For our cities and municipalities, that means that accommodation had to be organized, welcome classes, jobs, and support measures had to be taken. I also would like to thank all of those who help in this task, all the voluntary workers, non-profit organizations welcoming refugees, those who have just decided to roll up their sleeves and help. This is a sign of humanity, and from the very bottom of my heart, I would like to thank you. And I would like to add something. We will not leave you alone. I welcome it that the federal government and all those in charge in the municipalities and regions will meet in a summit. The federal government has supported municipalities in registering refugees, and as before, the federal government will support the municipalities with billions in order to put them in a position to take good care of those who are arriving. In other countries in the European Union, there is a huge willingness to help, and it is this common spirit that will be the basis of the European Council tomorrow when we discuss the support of Ukrainian refugees. With many of my colleagues, I have already held intense discussions. After years of a standstill, now progression is possible in European asylum policy, and this is a merit of the French, the Czech, and the current Swedish presidency. With the agreement on Eurodac and the screening regulation, years of blockade could be overcome, and I am in favor of negotiating it with the European Parliament at top speed because we need a clear situation when it comes to who comes to Europe and why, because this is the very basis of any kind of reform of our asylum system. The second element is an effective control of our external borders, also with the help of Frontex. Ursula von der Leyen already has made important proposals in light of the European Council tomorrow, such as border guards with our neighboring states in the European Union. And it was the right thing to do to make sure that the cooperation between the European Union and Turkey in the realm of refugees is continued. But now we need the EU member states because they need our support to protect their external borders, but also other nations have to accept asylum seekers on a voluntary basis, and here we use the voluntary mechanism of solidarity in the EU. Here we help the external states of the EU and help them in registering refugees. And here we're also advancing, which is why I am positive that a reform of the European asylum system will be possible in this European term if we keep up the speed and the pragmatism of the past 12 months. Another aspect could play a role that we sometimes neglected in the past. More and more European countries need skilled workers, skilled labor to come to Europe in conformity with law, and this is also true for Germany. We need skilled workers in great numbers. Of course, first and foremost, we invest in the vocational training of workers. Here, we try to make it possible for parents to work by providing them with childcare, and we make it possible to earn additional money on top of your pension. But if you take a look at the number of those who will retire in the next years, then you will understand that these measures alone will not eliminate the lack of skilled workers that we experience in Germany. In the past few years, many workers have come from other European nations to Germany due to the freedom of movement in the European Union. But this potential also has its limits, which is why our country needs skilled men and women from outside of Europe who help us in our companies, in our hospitals, in our trade and in our industry. In Germany, we want to create a modern migration law that helps to attract these talents to Germany. And at the same time, it is very clear, if you do not have a residence permit, you have to leave Germany, which is why we have lowered the legal barriers to return criminals to their country. We have made it sure that asylum procedures are sped up so that we know earlier who can stay and who can't. And on our administrative courts, we have also increased the speed of the processes. Internal border controls have been expanded at the German-Austrian and the German-Czech border, and together with Switzerland, we do border patrol. And last but not least, we will combine legal methods of migration with our clear expectation of the countries of origin to accept their citizens if they are not allowed to stay here. Last year, we had a migration agreement with India, which is working very well, and several more agreements will follow. With Joachim Stant, we now have a special representative for migration, and in parallel, we want to establish migration partnerships in the European Union. Ursula von der Leyen has also made proposals in that regard, and we fully support her efforts. This is how we bring this system in order. This is how we give the right incentive. And what is maybe even more important, this is how we keep up the acceptance that exists in our country, both for the freedom of movement in the European Union and the controlled migration of skilled labor. Dear colleagues, the second major topic that we will tackle at the European Council is European competitiveness. The Commission has already handed in very sensible proposals, and this will be the basis for our consultations, how we can help our companies to transform in view of the climate change and our challenging times. And at the same time, I do not agree with those who for months have come up with dire prospects regarding the deindustrialization of Europe or the migration of future technologies. None of these dark scenarios has materialized so far, and they will not, because Germany and Europe set their sails in the correct manner when it comes to the energy transition, the availability of raw materials, when it comes to competitiveness and the promotion of innovation. The retail prices for energy are not as high as they were. They have sunk down to the pre-war level, sometimes even lower, thanks to our measures. The inflation in Europe is going down. The industrial production is stable. Economic growth in the European Union has not gone down, but even slightly up in the last quarter. In 2021, it was higher than growth in China or the United States. The number of people employed in Germany and the European Union has reached a record high. And when it comes to making our supply chains and sales markets more diverse, we are advancing. It was only last week that I traveled to South America with an economic delegation, and the insights of this trip are new company partnerships, new members to the climate club that we have instigated, and at the same time the clear signal that a free trade agreement with Mercosur now has to become reality. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States, with their Inflation Reduction Act, have triggered a discussion about the economic location for climate technologies. It is true that we will see the consequences in Europe, but I think we should not be too negative when it comes to that. On the one hand, I think we should welcome it that the United States now have embraced the energy transition. And secondly, in Europe, we do have the economic prerequisites in order to master the transition of the industry. The Commission has presented calculations on that. The facilities that we have created during the COVID pandemic has an amount of 250 billion euros for the decarbonization of the European industry, and only a small share of it has been spent so far. The PowerEU initiative comes with another 20 billion in terms of funds, and a three-digit amount going into the billions is also available. With our EU programs, we foster public and private innovations in climate technologies, and here we have a EU fund of 26 million euros and another 42 million euros for research supporting the Green Deal. First and foremost, it will be European research facilities benefiting from that, and then there is the Cohesion Fund, and from the European emission trading, there are also substantial funds available. If we put all that next to the subsidies of $340 billion of the United States, then it is clear that we have no reason to hide. We will take a very close look if and where our schemes still leave gaps, and then we will find a way to close them. First of all, we need a careful analysis, as the Commission has promised to deliver. An unhindered competition against the United States would certainly be the wrong path. In the past few weeks, I've spoken to many companies in Davos, and when I traveled around Germany to Rhineland-Pfalz and Hesse, there a German-American company have started a semiconductor factory that we can use for renewable energies, electromobility, and communication technologies. This investment is only one amongst many international major investments in the semiconductor industry in Germany and Europe. In Saxony and Saxony-Anhalt, for example, many companies are about to open their doors, and the question of the investors is not first and foremost where the next big public fund can be found. It is their will to simplify our laws, to be faster in our funding decisions, and to use our tools in a flexible manner. And this is precisely what the Commission proposes in its memorandum for the European Council meeting, and I am very grateful for that. In order to strengthen Europe in global competition, we have to be serious about the flexibilization of the European state aid law, especially in these sectors that are needed for the transformation. And secondly, our European production capacities will be used for progressive, clean technologies in the fields of climate, construction, and transport. This is the only way to handle the increasing demand. Already last fall, the federal government has stood up for a clean tech initiative that subsidizes these technologies in the short term, and it is very good that this already has become one of the central aims of the Commission. And thirdly, we still believe in free and fair trade, because in a situation of globalization, a national way cannot work. We need open markets and global change based on high social and economic standards. The free trade agreement with the Mercosur states has already been mentioned. And beyond that, it is important to me to negotiate free trade agreements with Canada, North Korea, and Singapore. This is why the agreements with New Zealand and Chile are about to enter into force, and new ones, for example, with Indonesia, will be advanced. And of course, we want to strengthen the economic relations with the United States. Our ongoing discussions on the Inflation Reduction Act are a very good basis for that. At least if the United States refrain from rules that put a disadvantage on European companies compared to Canadian and Mexican ones. This is what we are consulting about with our American friends in a very calm and trustful manner. And that brings me full circle to what I've said in the beginning, how we work with our partners, how we align ourselves. The past 12 months have demonstrated that it's not fast and loud demands that win, but the careful, well-thought decisions. To work towards that. That, by the way, in my opinion, is Germany's role in Europe. This is about leading by bringing us together, by working towards solutions together with others. And this will be and is the compass for this government in European and foreign policy. And this is the compass that will guide me to the European Council summit in Brussels tomorrow. Thank you very much.
And we have been listening to Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, who was addressing the German Parliament, using his speech to, first of all, address the earthquake disaster in Turkey and Syria. He spoke about the war in Ukraine and Germany's continued support for Ukraine. And he also spoke at length about migration issues and increasing EU competitiveness. And he made a point of defending careful, well-thought-out decision-making and Germany leading in that way. And for analysis of all of that, I believe that we can bring in now DW Chief Political Correspondent Nina Hase, who is at the German Parliament. Nina, tell us what stood out for you in Olaf Scholz's speech.
Well, yeah, it was essentially the topics that we already addressed before he started speaking. So he spoke about the topics that are going to dominate the EU Council summit in Brussels tomorrow and Friday. Of course, Ukraine, really big topic. And what stood out for me there was that he said this summit is going to be used to further realign our common position. So there is a certain feeling here that not everybody is acting as fast as Ukraine needs to provide help, to provide weapons, etc. So this is definitely something where there's a lot of well, essentially need for debate behind the scenes as well. Then he talked about migration at length, and this was very much also addressed to the German audience, to German voters, because, and I thought what stood out was how he said, if we do all these things that we are trying to do right now, and he highlighted what all the plans were, then we will manage to keep up all the, essentially the goodwill in the German population, the belief that freedom of movement within the European Union is good, but also that we are a welcoming country, and also that we have to recognize that we do need skilled workers from abroad. So again, a slight hint there that not everybody agrees with him, and that many municipalities have been complaining for weeks and months now that they're simply not getting enough money to essentially house all the people who are coming to Germany and who are looking for work. So then the third topic, competitiveness on the European level, he spelled out again what he thinks Europe's reaction should be. And again, a very typical Scholz sentence was, we do need a careful analysis. Of course, the US, he was referring to the Inflation Reduction Act, that big subsidies package worth hundreds of billions of dollars, where European companies say that they might suffer disadvantages. But he said, before we essentially provoke the US too much, we do need to find common ground there.
Just coming back to his focus on Ukraine, he made a point of saying Germany's support for Ukraine will continue. Yet it's a fact that German public opinion is still divided, especially on these tank deliveries to Ukraine. Do you think that he was able to reassure people by the tone that he struck?
Well, he's being criticised from all sides, and usually for a politician, that's not the worst thing. If you're being criticised by everybody, that means that you are really trying to forge compromises. And this is something many people are saying. Olaf Scholz is now being a warmonger because he's the one who's sending all those heavy tanks to Ukraine. Other countries aren't, apart from the US, the UK, who so far have made specific pledges. But also other people are saying he's being too slow. So he is trying to essentially just explain this narrative that he thinks he has to weigh up all the advantages and disadvantages. But above all, I think Olaf Scholz also always talks to other countries around the world when he talks about Ukraine. He talks to countries like Brazil, like also South Africa, like India, many countries that are not as clearly outspokenly behind support for Ukraine as countries in Europe are. And he always addresses those countries and reiterates why he thinks it has to be made clear that Russia is the aggressor and that Ukraine is having to react, and that that is why the Western world needs to help Ukraine so that Russia doesn't get this message that it's okay to invade another country.
He did make very clear, though, didn't he, that NATO is not in this war with Ukraine. That was a point that he really focused on, wasn't it?
That is exactly what I'm trying to say, that Olaf Scholz has the G20 countries in mind, if you will. He always talks about how these countries are going to become really important geopolitical players in the near future, and many of those are not as explicitly supporting Ukraine as Olaf Scholz would want that to happen. So he is trying to make it clear, all these principles, you keep hearing them from him over and over again. One, Russia invaded Ukraine. Ukraine didn't start. Two, we need to support Ukraine for as long as it takes because we can't tolerate a violation of international law like that. And three, we have to do that all together and we have to react exactly. And it's not NATO that's waging a war against Russia. Russia is waging a war against Ukraine.
Nina, thanks so much for that analysis. That's DW's chief political correspondent, Nina Hase. OK, we're going to go back to our top story now. And more than 11,000 people are now known to have been killed in the earthquakes that struck Turkey and Syria. The death toll is